Welcome everyone to the Iris Revenge channel. My fiancé didn't want me to meet his parents and said they wouldn't be at the wedding, so I secretly went to see them, and I was shocked by what I discovered. Rachel Carter never thought her life would feel this steady so soon after nursing school. New scrubs still stiff from the tag-long shifts at the hospital where the smell of antiseptic clung to her hair, and an apartment she could barely afford, but loved because it was hers. That was when she met David Miller. He wasn't the loudest or most charming man in the room, but in a world where everyone seemed to talk over her, David actually listened. He was calm, patient, the kind of person who never forgot to hold the door or refill her coffee on a late night when she came home too tired to think. At first, he was just a neighbor who helped carry her groceries up the narrow stairwell when the paper bags ripped. But before long, those small kindnesses turned into long talks on the porch, shared takeout cartons, and eventually, the quiet certainty of love. From the outside, it looked like Rachel had finally found her match, someone dependable, someone safe. But beneath the laughter and easy routines, there were cracks she couldn't ignore. Each time she mentioned her parents or stories from her childhood, David would smile politely, ask questions, even tease her about old photos she kept on her fridge. Yet when she asked about his family where he grew up, what his parents were like, his answers were thin, carefully rehearsed, always steering the conversation away. And that silence, though subtle at first, began to feel heavier with each passing month. Before we dive deeper into Rachel's story, let me ask you something. Have you ever been with someone who seemed perfect on the surface but avoided entire parts of their past as if they were forbidden? If you have, you'll know why Rachel's curiosity soon turned into unease. Also, if this is your first time here, welcome. We share true-to-life stories that dig into hidden family secrets and the kind of twists you can't make up. So don't forget to hit subscribe and comment below where you're watching from. Back to Rachel. By the time David knelt down with a ring in his hand under the golden streetlights of downtown Indianapolis, Rachel's heart said yes instantly. Her parents cried with joy, already picturing a summer wedding, and for a while she told herself not to care about what David wouldn't say, because in every other way he was exactly the man she needed. But what Rachel didn't know was that this silence, the part of David's life he kept buried, was about to pull her into a world she never imagined, and it would test not just their love, but her very understanding of what it means to build a family. The first sign that David's silence was more than just shyness came the very night Rachel's parents began sketching out the wedding plans at their kitchen table, mugs of coffee growing cold as her mom rambled excitedly about flower arrangements and playlists. Rachel had always been close to her family. They were the kind who never missed Sunday dinners or small-town holiday parades, and so of course they wanted to meet David's parents. "We'll need to coordinate with his side too," her mother said brightly, jotting notes in a spiral-bound planner. "Does his mom prefer lilies or roses? And his dad? What kind of music does he like?" Rachel smiled nervously because the truth was she didn't know. She realized with a sudden pang that she had no details to offer. I'll ask," she muttered and quickly changed the subject. Later that night, as they washed dishes in the tiny apartment, she asked David about it, gently hoping he'd finally open up. "My mom keeps asking about your family," she said, handing him a dripping plate. "They'd love to have them over. Just dinner. Nothing fancy." David's hands stilled in the soapy water, and for a moment his whole body seemed to tense. Then, without looking at her, he shook his head. "It's not going to happen," he said flatly. "They won't be at the wedding." Rachel blinked, waiting for a smile. Some explanation, but none came. "What do you mean they won't be there? You haven't even told them the date." David's jaw tightened. "I don't need to. It's not possible. Let's just leave it at that." He reached for another dish as though the conversation had already ended, but Rachel stood frozen, her stomach twisting. For the first time, she realized that this wasn't just about shyness or distance. He was actively shutting her out. The unease grew sharper at a family dinner the following week when her father, a man of few words but sharp instincts, leaned back in his chair and asked, "So, David, what does your dad do for a living?" The room fell silent, every eye fixed on him, but David only forced a thin smile and replied, "He's busy. We don't see each other much." Then he changed the subject to Rachel's work at the hospital. Rachel felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as her parents exchanged uneasy glances. She wanted to sink under the table. Afterward, her mother pulled her aside in the kitchen and whispered, "Honey, is there something you're not telling us? Does his family not approve of you?" The question hit Rachel like a slap. Not because it was true, but because she didn't have an answer. She hated the humiliation of being left in the dark, of defending a silence she didn't understand. That night, lying in bed next to David, she couldn't sleep. His breathing was steady, almost too steady, as if he were forcing himself to stay calm. Her mind, however, churned. Why was he hiding them? Was it shame? Was it something darker? Rachel wanted to believe he trusted her, but trust didn't look like this. Trust wasn't a locked door she wasn't allowed to open. And yet she loved him. That love complicated everything. She remembered the way he'd once driven across town at midnight to bring her soup when she caught the flu, the way he rubbed her shoulders when her back ached from long shifts. This was the same man. And so she told herself not to push, not to ruin what they had. But deep down, the humiliation of not knowing gnawed at her. Every time her parents brought up the wedding, she felt smaller, weaker, like she was marrying a stranger. If you've ever been in love with someone who kept their past locked away, you'll understand Rachel's frustration here. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was the creeping fear that she didn't really know the man she had agreed to spend her life with. And though she couldn't see it yet, this silence, this wall he kept building, was about to drive her toward a choice that would change everything. Rachel told herself she'd let it go, that love was about patience, about respecting boundaries. But the truth was, David's silence had become a shadow in their relationship, one that seemed to grow darker with each passing week. It wasn't just her parents' questions, it was the way coworkers asked casually about in-laws, and Rachel had nothing to offer the way invitations to holiday dinners arrived from her friends, and she had no family stories to exchange. She began to feel like she was living half a life where part of David was locked away. One rainy Thursday evening, David mentioned offhand that he'd be driving to Fort Wayne for a client meeting, just an overnight stay. He kissed her cheek left before sunrise the next morning, and Rachel watched from the window as his taillights disappeared into the mist. That was the moment her resolve hardened. If he wasn't going to tell her the truth, she had to find it herself. She started small, tidying up the apartment as if to distract herself. But when she opened the top drawer of his desk, searching for an extra notepad, she found something that made her breath catch: a sealed envelope, yellowed around the edges, addressed in neat handwriting to Linda Miller, Evansville, Indiana. Her hands trembled as she held it. Linda, his mother. She remembered him mentioning that name once, quickly, as if it had slipped out by accident. She placed the envelope back carefully, heart pounding, but the decision had already taken root in her mind. That Saturday morning, she packed an overnight bag under the guise of running errands and told her parents she'd be gone for the day. Sliding behind the wheel of her aging Corolla, she entered the Evansville address into her GPS. The screen flickered with directions, a pale blue line stretching into unfamiliar territory. As the miles ticked away, the landscape began to change. Indianapolis's neat neighborhoods gave way to smaller towns, their streets lined with shuttered shops and faded billboards. The further she drove, the heavier her chest felt, as if the air itself knew she was trespassing into a world David wanted erased. Rachel gripped the steering wheel tighter, every bump in the cracked highway jolting her with doubt. Was she betraying him? Was this the kind of line you couldn't uncross? But then she thought about their future, about children. One day asking about their grandparents, about anniversaries, where half the family tree was a blank space. She couldn't build a marriage on questions that never got answered. She had to know. As the Evansville exit appeared, her GPS voice crackling through the speakers, Rachel's mind raced with possibilities. Maybe his parents were wealthy but cruel, ashamed of him. Maybe they were estranged over politics or religion. Or maybe her stomach twisted, there was something far darker. She replayed David's words in her head. They won't be at the wedding. Let's just leave it at that. She turned down a narrow side street lined with sagging porches and overgrown lawns, the kind of place where time seemed to have stopped. A stray dog darted across the road. The houses leaned tiredly against one another, windows boarded up, mailboxes rusted. And then, at the end of the block, she saw it, the address from the envelope. The Miller house. The siding was peeling, the porch littered with empty beer cans, a lawn chair tipped on its side. A broken screen door slapped against its frame with the wind. Rachel parked a few houses away and killed the engine, her hands slick with sweat on the steering wheel. For a long moment she sat there listening to the faint hum of her car cooling down. Her heart thudded so loudly she swore it echoed inside the small cabin. What she didn't realize was that this trip, this choice to disobey David's silence, was about to pull her into a reality far more painful than she had imagined. A reality that would explain everything and force her to decide whether she could truly stand beside the man she thought she knew. Rachel sat in her car staring at the sagging Miller house until her breath fogged the windshield, trying to summon the courage to step out. The closer she looked, the more details unsettled her, the way the curtains hung yellowed and stiff, the sound of a television blaring too loud inside the porch steps, warped as if they might collapse under her weight. Every instinct told her to turn around to drive home and pretend she'd never come, but the image of David's flat expression when he said, "They won't be at the wedding," pressed her forward. She climbed out, boots crunching on gravel, and walked up the creaking porch. When she knocked, the smell hit first: sour alcohol, stale smoke, something rancid clinging to the boards. The door swung open after a long pause, revealing a woman whose age was hard to guess. Her hair matted in greasy strands, eyes rimmed red, a faded robe slipping from one shoulder. She gripped the doorframe for balance, a half-empty bottle of vodka dangling from her free hand. What she barked, her voice sharp and slurred all at once. Rachel's throat went dry. I'm looking for Linda Miller." The woman's gaze narrowed. "You found her. Who are you?" Rachel opened her mouth, but before she could answer, a voice cut through the hallway behind Linda. "Mom, leave her alone. She's not here for you." A boy stepped into view, maybe 13 or 14 tall for his age, but thin, his t-shirt hanging off narrow shoulders. His eyes, sharp green, defiant, locked onto Rachel. He didn't flinch. "Who are you?" he asked, ignoring Linda completely. Rachel hesitated, but something in the boy's stare demanded honesty. "I know David. I'm his fiancé." The effect was instant. The boy's expression hardened, a bitter laugh escaping his throat. "Of course. So he finally got tired of pretending we don't exist." His words cut deeper than Rachel expected, each syllable edged with resentment. Linda swung toward him, swaying. "Don't you talk about your brother like that. You don't know what he's done for us." She jabbed a finger toward Rachel. "And you don't belong here. Get off my porch." But the boy didn't move. Instead, he stepped closer, his jaw clenched. "He never comes back," he spat. "Not since Dad died. He left me here with her." His hand jerked toward his mother, who muttered something under her breath and stumbled back into the dim hallway. The boy's voice dropped lower, steady but raw. "Do you know why he won't talk about us? Because this place eats people alive?" Rachel's pulse hammered in her ears. She wanted to run, yet she couldn't take her eyes off the boy. He was younger than her youngest cousin, yet carried himself like someone twice his age. "What's your name?" she asked softly. "Sam," he said flatly. "Sam Miller. David's brother." The words sank in with a weight that nearly knocked the air from Rachel's chest. Brother. David had never once mentioned having a younger brother. Her mind scrambled with questions, but Sam's glare silenced her. He told you we don't exist, didn't he? That's what he does. He pretends. He ran away, and he doesn't look back. Behind them, Linda's voice rose again, bitter and cracked. Don't listen to him. That boy's ungrateful. Your David's a good son, he sent money, he tried. She stumbled, clutching the wall for support. But he thinks he's too good for his own family now. She took another swig from the bottle, coughing as she sank into a stained recliner. Rachel swallowed hard, torn between the mother's drunken rambling and the boy's fierce honesty. The house smelled of decay, the wallpaper peeling in strips, the carpet littered with cigarette burns. It was a world David had worked hard to erase, yet here it was, alive and unavoidable. Sam's eyes softened just slightly as he looked at her again. You don't get it yet, do you? He's not embarrassed of us. He's ashamed of himself. Of what happened here. He turned toward the hallway, his shoulders stiff. But you'll find out. You'll see why he never talks about it. Rachel stood frozen on the porch, her mind spinning as Sam disappeared back into the shadows of the house. Linda's drunken muttering filled the silence, bitter fragments of sentences that made no sense. Rachel felt the truth pressing in from every side, suffocating. David hadn't just been hiding his parents. He'd been hiding a broken home, a lost brother, and a past soaked in grief. As she stepped back into the cold evening air, one thought consumed her: nothing about David's silence had been random. It was deliberate, born of something so painful he couldn't even let her glimpse it. And she was only beginning to peel back the layers. Rachel couldn't shake Sam's words as she walked back toward her car. You'll see why he never talks about it. They clung to her like burrs, sticking no matter how she tried to brush them off. She sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel, staring at the flickering porch light of the Miller house. Part of her wanted to start the engine and flee back to the safety of Indianapolis, pretend none of this had happened. But another part, the part that had said yes to David's proposal, the part that couldn't ignore her parents' confusion and her own sleepless nights, needed to know the truth. Before she could talk herself out of it, she spotted Sam slipping out the side door, pulling a thin hoodie over his shoulders. Without thinking, Rachel got out and followed. He didn't go far, just down the block to a cracked basketball court with rusted hoops. He sat on the curb, pulling at the laces of his sneakers, looking smaller now, without the anger that had flared at the house. Rachel approached slowly, unsure if he'd tell her to leave. Instead, Sam looked up, his green eyes sharp even in the dim streetlight. "Why are you here?" he asked, not cruelly, just tired. "I had to know," Rachel admitted. "David won't tell me anything. He acts like you don't exist. But I know that's not true. And if I'm supposed to marry him, I can't live in the dark." Sam let out a hollow laugh. "That's David. Pretend it never happened. Pretend we're not here. It's the only way he knows how to survive." He picked up a piece of gravel and tossed it across the court, watching it skitter. "You really want to know why?" Rachel nodded, her throat tight. Sam leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Our dad's dead. He died in a car wreck. But it wasn't just an accident. He was drunk. Drunk like always. And Mom?" His voice cracked, but he forced the words out. "She was the one who gave him the keys that night. He crashed head-on with another car on Highway 41, killed instantly. And the worst part, I was the one who found him when they called us. They made me go with a neighbor to identify his things. I was 12. Rachel felt her stomach twist, bile rising. Oh my God. Sam's jaw clenched. David hated him for it. Hated her even more. He covered for years, you know. When Dad was passed out, when Mom was too drunk to cook. It was David who made sure me and Daniel. He cut himself off, eyes darting away. Daniel, Rachel asked gently. Sam swallowed hard. Our brother. Middle child. He's gone too. The words hit Rachel like a blow. She blinked rapidly, heart pounding. What happened? Sam stared at the ground, his voice dropping to a whisper. Mom's boyfriend. She brought him around after Dad died. He was mean, always drunk. One night he pulled a knife on her in the kitchen. Daniel tried to stop him. He got stabbed. Right there on the linoleum. I watched him fall. His voice broke, now raw and unsteady. He was 16. I screamed until my throat bled. David wasn't home that night. He was stuck in Cleveland because of a snowstorm. He blames himself. He thinks if he'd been there, Daniel would still be alive. Rachel pressed a hand to her mouth, tears stinging her eyes. She could almost see it, the chaos, the screaming, the blood, the little brother frozen in terror. She wanted to tell Sam it wasn't David's fault, that no one could have stopped that storm, but she could hear the weight of guilt woven into every word, a guilt David had clearly carried for years. Sam shook his head, wiping his sleeve roughly across his eyes. He came back for the funeral. He yelled at Mom, told her she'd killed him. He packed his things and left. He swore he'd never set foot in this house again. And he didn't. He sends money sometimes, yeah. He makes sure I've got food, shoes. But he won't come back. Not for me. Not for her. Not for anyone. He built a new life, and he shut the door on us. Rachel felt her chest ache with a mixture of sorrow and fury, not at Sam, not even at David, but at the cruelty of it all. The boy beside her had been left to grow up in ruins, while the man she loved carried scars he'd never let her see. Sam, she whispered. I'm so sorry. He shrugged, trying to sound older than his years. Don't be. This is just what it is. People either escape or they get swallowed. David escaped. I'm still here. Rachel's mind whirled as she drove back the next morning, the early sun cutting sharp against her windshield. She replayed Sam's story again and again, each detail sharper than the last. By the time she pulled into her apartment's parking lot, her heart hammered with one thought: she couldn't stay silent anymore. David had hidden the truth for too long, but she couldn't marry him without confronting it. That evening, when David returned from his work trip, his shoulders weary, Rachel waited at the kitchen table, hands folded so tightly her knuckles ached. He kissed her cheek automatically, but when he saw her expression, he froze. What is it? He asked, voice low. Rachel took a steady breath. I went to Evansville. His face drained of color instantly, his jaw slack. You... What? His voice trembled and he dropped his briefcase with a thud. I met Sam, she said quietly. I know about your dad. About Daniel. About your mom. I know why you don't want them at the wedding. For a long moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. David's hands trembled as he pressed them against the table, head bowed. When he finally looked up, his eyes were bloodshot raw. You weren't supposed to see any of it, he whispered, his voice breaking. I've spent my whole life trying to bury that place. I didn't want you dragged into it. I didn't want you to see me like that. Rachel reached across her fingers, brushing his arm. David, you've carried this alone for too long. You blame yourself for things you couldn't control. But I know now. And I'm not walking away. His body shook, a sob tearing loose as he sank into the chair beside her. For the first time, the wall he had built crumbled, and Rachel held his pain with him. In that moment, she understood that their love would only survive if they faced the darkness together. The night David finally confessed everything, Rachel thought the hardest part was over. She believed that once the truth was out, they could breathe again, heal together. But secrets don't dissolve just because they've been spoken aloud. Sometimes they cling tighter, demanding to be faced. In the days that followed, David moved like a man split in two. At work, he smiled politely, kept his shirts pressed, his files in order. But at home, the weight of his past pressed against every silence, every unfinished sentence. Rachel could see it in the way he lingered at the sink after dinner, staring at nothing, in the way his hand tightened around hers when her phone buzzed with a call from her mother asking about wedding plans. Finally, one night as they sat in bed, Rachel turned to him, her voice steady. You don't have to keep running from them. You don't have to let Sam grow up the way you did. David shook his head, his eyes dark. You don't understand. Going back there, it's poison. Every time I set foot in that house, I feel like I'm drowning. I tried to save them, Rachel. I tried for years. It killed Daniel. It broke me. And Mom, she doesn't want saving. She's chosen the bottle every single time. But Sam hasn't, Rachel countered, her voice rising. He's just a kid. He's living in that house with her. You said you'd never forgive yourself for Daniel. Are you really going to let the same thing happen to your little brother? The words hit him like a blow. He pressed the heels of his hands to his eyes as if trying to block out the image of Sam's defiant green gaze. For a long time, he didn't speak. Then finally, in a hoarse whisper, he said, "What do you want me to do?" The next week became a blur of phone calls and paperwork. Rachel watched as David, his voice shaking but steady, called a lawyer to ask about guardianship. The lawyer explained the process: background checks, home visits, court hearings. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be fast. But it was possible. David scribbled notes furiously, every line underlined twice. Linda didn't take it well. When she caught wind of what he was trying to do, she left him a voicemail. Her voice slurred and venomous. "You think you're better than me. You think you can just take my son away. I'll fight you, David. You abandoned us. You don't get to swoop in now." Rachel sat with him as he replayed the message, jaw clenched so tight the veins stood out on his neck. "She's never going to change," he muttered. "She'd rather drag Sam down with her than admit what she's done." And yet, even as Linda hurled threats and accusations, the system seemed to recognize what David had been trying to do quietly all along. Social workers visited their apartment, noting its stability, the tidy rooms, the stocked fridge. Rachel found herself cooking bigger dinners, making space in the closet, preparing as though Sam might walk through the door any day. There were setbacks, of course. One court date delayed because Linda didn't show. Another derailed when she staggered in drunk, slurring accusations that David was stealing her child. Rachel sat in the back of the courtroom, her hands trembling, watching David stand tall, his voice clear and unwavering as he told the judge about the nights he'd fed Sam, about the bank account he'd opened for him, about the funeral he'd carried on his shoulders when Daniel was buried. Through it all, Rachel's parents quietly shifted from suspicion to fierce support. Her father drove them to one hearing, sitting silently in the gallery, his stern expression softening just slightly when he saw David steady Sam with a hand on his shoulder. Her mother began inviting Sam for Sunday dinners even before anything was official, setting a place at the table as though to remind him he wasn't invisible. By late summer, the judge's decision came down: temporary guardianship granted to David pending review. Sam, who had grown thinner since Rachel last saw him, clutched the papers with a grip so tight they crumpled at the edges. He looked at his brother, his voice breaking as he whispered, "So I don't have to go back." David crouched in front of him, his hand trembling on Sam's shoulder. "Not anymore," he said softly. "You're safe now. I promise." It was a victory, but not without cost. Linda didn't show up again, not even to contest the next hearing. Rumors spread that she'd left Evansville altogether, vanishing into the haze of her addiction. For David, it wasn't triumph, it was grief, layered with resolve. As they walked out of the courthouse together, Rachel saw it in his eyes: the past would always ache. But for the first time, he was choosing not to let it define their future. The courthouse wedding wasn't what Rachel's mother had dreamed of, but as sunlight streamed through tall windows and glinted off the polished wood floors, Rachel knew it was exactly what she wanted. There were no limousines, no chandeliers, no grand aisle lined with roses. Just David standing in a navy suit, his hand trembling slightly as he took hers, and Sam dressed in a borrowed tie that hung a little crooked, seated proudly in the front row beside Rachel's parents. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, Rachel felt her throat tighten. It wasn't the crowd or the ceremony that made it real. It was the quiet squeeze of David's hand, the tears in Sam's eyes, the sense that after so much darkness, they were finally building something steady, something whole. Afterward, instead of a banquet hall, they walked to a small diner 2 blocks away, sliding into vinyl booths that smelled faintly of coffee and bacon. The waitress, upon learning it was a wedding celebration, brought out a slice of pie with congratulations written in chocolate syrup across the plate, refusing to let them pay for it. Everyone laughed when David tried to cut it neatly, only for Sam to snatch the first bite with a grin. Rachel's parents took pictures on their phones, capturing moments that no photographer could stage, the kind of snapshots that would matter more in the years to come. But the real turning point came weeks later when David finally said the words Rachel had been waiting to hear: "I want to take you both to see Daniel." The drive back to Evansville was quiet, Sam leaning against the window, Rachel holding David's hand tightly. At the cemetery, David carried a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, his steps heavy as they approached a modest headstone etched with his brother's name. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. Then, sinking to his knees, his voice cracked as he whispered, "I should have been there. I'm sorry. I've carried this for so long. Daniel and I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself. But I promise, I'll protect Sam. I'll give him the life you wanted for him." Rachel knelt beside him, her arm around his back, while Sam placed his small hand on his brother's shoulder. The three of them stood in silence as the autumn wind rattled through the trees, carrying away years of unspoken grief. David's tears fell freely, but this time they weren't just for loss, they were for release. For the first time, Rachel saw not a man weighed down by his past, but one ready to live beyond it. As they walked back to the car, Sam between them, Rachel understood the lesson this journey had carved into her heart. Family wasn't the perfect picture on a holiday card. It wasn't tradition or appearances or pretending everything was fine. Family was choosing to stand beside each other even when the past was broken and messy, even when it hurt. Love was more than romance. It was shouldering the burdens together, refusing to let history decide the future. Months later, their apartment no longer felt like just hers or his. It echoed with Sam's laughter, with late-night homework spread across the kitchen table, with the clatter of dishes as they cooked dinner together. The shadows of David's past didn't vanish, but they no longer ruled him. Rachel would sometimes catch him watching Sam, pride and relief flickering in his eyes, and she knew that in saving his brother, he had saved himself too. For Rachel, the message was simple, and it was one she hoped others might hear: love doesn't erase pain, but it can transform it. It can take the sharpest wounds and soften them into scars that tell a story of survival. And for David, for Sam, for her, the story was no longer one of silence and shame. It was one of resilience, forgiveness, and a family reborn. Thank you for listening until the very last moments of this story. Please leave a comment and share your thoughts and feelings. And if this is your first time visiting this channel, don't forget to hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell so you won't miss out on these real-life stories that are deep, bitter, and full of spectacular plot twists. See you in the next videos.